So yeah, welcome to Life Along the Line. So my name is Sam Slatcher and I'm one of the directors of Citizen Songwriters. So we're a social enterprise and passionate about bringing together communities in the Northeast through culture and arts. We support individuals and communities to take part in the cultural life of their community. A big part of the work we do is working collaboratively with communities, so joining them in sharing their story in creative ways through poetry, through song, through spoken word, and so on. So today is the beginning of a new journey for us in exploring the rich and fascinating history of the Stockton and Darlington Railway in the run-up to the 200-year anniversary, which will be 2025 of the very significant railway history, and being the first passenger railway company of its kind. And I'll leave a lot of that to the experts who are going to talk about the Stockton and Darlington Railway in due course. But just to say a little bit about the project. So we have workshops in June, all being well, taking place in person in and around Shildon, as well as workshops with local primary schools, and then a presentation of the songs at Locomotion in July, all being well. So today is a taster of what is to come. You'll hear from different groups who already have been storytelling for much longer and have some fascinating insights from their work in Shildon and around the Southwest. So to set the scene, I want to just begin with a reflection. So in digging around some of the archives around Locomotion's famous first journey in 1825, I was gripped by a particular phrase that I found from an 8-year-old boy who was present on the 27th of September, 1825, who was there witnessing Locomotion's first journey towards Stockton from Shildon. And his name was Jonathan Backhouses, and he wrote to his sisters, "It was a very grand sight to see such a mass of moving people." I'm just going to share my presentation again so you can see that quote. So that's brought out, so hopefully you can see that. And this got me thinking about that phrase, and this is a really short piece which is just to kick us off, called "A Mass of Moving People." Ever been out walking in the fields when a train hurries by and thought how incredible it is that for a few moments hundreds of bodies rush past in sync across the horizon? Thousands of lives, all with their own complexities, their own fears and hopes, needs and expectations, anticipations for the journey that lies ahead. All for a moment in sync, a rumble of expectation, and then a blur of metal and colour schemes gliding across the land. And then moments later, the calm, the whooshing receding, and the world returning to stillness once again. What a very grand sight to see such a mass moving people, we all ponder for a moment. What a very grand sight to see such a mass of moving people, wrote the 8-year-old from Shildon to his dear sisters, along with a cartoon, hopefully you can see this, along with a cartoon of massive tiny cartoon wagons that he'd scribbled across the page. His ode to history being forged in one day, a witness to the first steam haul passenger train on the first government-granted public railway. Life would never be the same again for Jonathan's world, as steel rails sprung up across hills and valleys and linked towns and cities near and far. The railway would usher forward the second wave of the Industrial Revolution, and in the words of Thomas Carlyle, would set all the towns of Britain a-dancing, and wider still, would set the world on track. It would be like the wildfire of the internet or social media is today, connecting commerce and trade, ideas and innovation, as well as education and leisure, but also completely reorientating communities and the people that live within them. What a very grand sight to see indeed. So tonight is a presentation of stories from the source of what we know as railway today, that span from 1823 through to today, whether the railway workers, the residents of Shildon, to the ongoing work to preserve and keep alive Shildon's place in the historical events of the town that paved the way for the railways today. So we're delighted to be honoured to be joined tonight by the Friends of the Stockton and Darlington Railway, along with the Shildon Railway Institute. So to begin with, I'm going to hand over to Niall Hammond, who is the chair of the Friends of the Stockton and Darlington Railway, who's going to give us more detail on why Shildon is a story. So it's over to you, Niall.
Thanks, Sam. Let's see whether we get the technology to work just by showing my screen. So that's complicated. Right. Can people see a pretty picture rather than me?
Yes.
Good. So it's always better to look at that than me. Right. My name's Niall Hammond. I originally grew up in Richmond in North Yorkshire, but I've lived in Durham in the North East for most of my working life. I'm a historian and archaeologist, and I was there in 1975 in Shildon when the cavalcade was there, and I've always found the railway fascinating. So for the last 5 or 6 years, myself and like-minded people have been working on a project as a charity, Friends of Stockton Darlington Railway, along the 26 miles to try and make sure we're in a fit state for 2025. And it's not just something that the big museums do, but it's something the communities along the line celebrate and do and look after into the future. So what I thought I'd do for the next sort of 15, 20 minutes is just give you a little bit of history and some ideas for stories. And one of the things that Sam's project is trying to do is to get people thinking about the people who created this. 'Cause it's not just all about engineering, it is about people at the end of the day. And the amazing things they did, things that even today with our modern technology, it's difficult to imagine how they did it. So just taking you way, way back. Shildon, when did Shildon start? There's a question. Shildon's an Anglo-Saxon name, and there was a little village here, probably from the 9th century. So Shildon's over 1,000 years old, but for most of that time, it's just been a little village, an agricultural village. A little bit of coal mining on the edges, but pretty much history passing it by, nice and quiet. The name itself means the village or hamlet between two hills. Which two hills? I don't know. But the first time it appears on a map is the one you can see in front of you, which is the 1560s. And there it is in the middle, just showing as a single little cottage. And we know from records at the time it had a population of about maybe 80 or 90 people farming the land, not doing much, quietly passing life by. This was all going to change. First sign of this happening was in the 1760s, when those people down at the mouth of the river at Stockton and Darlington were trying to think about how do we get all this coal that appears to be in West Durham down to the coast, sell it and export it. So the first idea they had was one of a canal, and that was surveyed in 1767. And there is a plan of it, and here's a little extract from it. The pinky line you can see going through the middle is where the canal would have gone. And if they had built it, it would have passed Shildon by. It would have been on the other side of the hill, down towards Summerhouse, Denton and Killerby. And Shildon may have stayed a quiet place. We'll never know. But the canal was hugely expensive. Nobody was willing to put up the money for it. So for the next 30 or 40 years, things went quiet again. But not long after that, around about 1818, a group of businessmen, again meeting in Yarm this time, had another think. And someone suggested the idea of a railway. Now, railways in those days were pretty primitive things. And the man they picked to do the first survey was a chap called George Overton, who was from Wales. And he came all the way up here, probably through links to Quaker families. And he surveyed from what was called a tramway, which was little tiny thin rails pulled by horses slowly. And it would have done, but it would have certainly wouldn't have changed the world like the Stockton Darlington Railway was going to do. But it got people thinking, it got people raising money, it got them raising capital, and eventually it got them applying for an Act of Parliament, because this railway was going to be different. It was going to involve buying the land rather than just leasing it from landowners, and it was going to be permanent, which was a whole way different from anything that had gone before it. So instead of little horses trailing across the hillside, we were going to end up with something far more impressive, with steam engines, malleable iron rails, and the latest technology brought from all over the place into one place all in the same time. And that views the Pockley Wagonway, which is up at Beamish. And if you want an experience of what it would have been like to ride the Stockton and Darlington Railway, that's the place to go, because it's as near as damn it as you can get these days. So Mr. Overton came up, he surveyed his route. They said, thank you very much, but no, we've got a better idea now. And a man called George Stephenson came into the picture. And he came along and he resurveyed the line because his steam locomotives needed a shallower gradient or different gradients to the horse-drawn things that Overton had presumed. And this is an extract from a fantastic set of drawings he did, all the way from Witton Park to Stockton, showing where the line was going to go. And this is the section as it goes past Shildon. So the blue line is the line that Overton surveyed for his horse-drawn one. The red line is the one that Stephenson came up with, where it was going to be different. And if you look at that, you can see Shildon, just those few little tiny dots just to the north of the line. It's still a small village. It's got a colliery, but down by the line and where those two red lines meet, you can see my little arrows, that's roughly about where Hackworth Cottage and the Locomotion Museum is. But there's nothing down there in those days. In fact, there was an engineer, John Dixon, who was the company engineer of the SNDR, writing in later days. He wrote, "I've known Shildon for 50 years when there was not a house or any sort at New Shildon, much less a Mechanics Institute. When I surveyed the lines of the projected railway in 1821 with Mr. Stevenson, the site of this New Shildon works was a wet, swampy field, a likely place to find a snipe or a flock of peewits. And Dad Adamson's pub was the nearest house. A part of Old Shildon existed, but it was only a little tiny row of miners' houses." So the title I gave this talk was Shildon, the town that the railways built. And we'll see by the end of it that it also is Shildon, it's the town that built the railways. It's a mutual project. One created the other, and then the other went on to create the worldwide railway. So from that survey, things moved on quite rapidly. The coal mines, think of coal mines in those days. You're not talking about big coal mines. You're talking about little holes in fields quite often with a windlass and people going down. You're not talking about big collieries, which came later on. But the growth of the railway meant the coal industry grew hugely. So by the 1840s, and these are two drawings by a chap called Thomas Hare, the top left one is the Phoenix pit up near Etherley. The bottom one's at Byers Green. The collieries had begun to grow, but they were still pretty homespun affairs, but beginning to be powered by steam engines and the coal extracted. And everything was growing. People were moving to the area for the jobs. And the whole of this sort of rural part of southwest Durham was rapidly industrialising. So by 1825, 1827, the railway was there, all the way from Witton Park in the west through to Stockton. And the difference between this and other earlier railways, it wasn't the first public railway, it wasn't even the first railway to use a steam locomotive. It was the first place that brought lots of ideas and inventions all together in one place and made them work. It turned a handsome profit, and people came from all over the world to see how you built a railway, and went away and started building railways in the States, in Prussia, in France, setting the world on a very different path to the one it had gone before, you know, so supercharging the Industrial Revolution. What you might have seen if you've been around in 1825 in Shildon, again, this is up at Beamish, where as well as the replica of Locomotion Number 1, which has since moved to Darlington, they've rebuilt a replica of Timothy Hackworth's engineering works, a building that was demolished in the 1950s and lost to us, sadly. But you can go up there and at least see what it would have looked like. But the whole landscape was being changed by the railway. So things like Brusselton Incline, just to the west of Shildon, there you can see the line of the incline, the buildings in the middle where the engine house was, hauling carriages up one side and down the other because it was far too steep for the early engines to use. But again, these places begin to get personalities associated with them. The Greener family became the engine drivers at Brusselton and at Etherley. And there's a great story from 1831, because it wasn't just used for coal trucks. They did actually haul passengers up and down it. And lots of boys were employed to act as brakemen going up and going down the side into Shildon. And in one incident in 1831, a wagon which was carrying Joseph and Henry Pease, so two of the owners of the railway, Timothy Hackworth, its major engineer living in Shildon, and William Kitching, who ran Kitching's Ironworks in Darlington, which became a major creator of railway engines, who was allegedly quite a stout chap, shall we say. The brakes broke on it, the truck began hurtling down the hill, and everyone apart from our stout friend Mr. Kitching managed to get out. And luckily, one of the youths who was employed to try and stop the truck leapt on board, a chap called John Summerson, and he managed to bring it to a halt without Mr. Kitching either dying or the trucks coming off the line, which he was given the grand reward of a whole shilling. I seem to think you probably deserved a lot more than that. But again, it's just all these people who begin to sort of add to the story of the SNDR and the growing settlement of Shildon. You walk around Shildon itself, and we've got Shildon, the old medieval village, and we've got New Shildon, joined together now, but originally separate parts. But there's just so much railway history in and amongst the village itself. So if you stand there today, looking down Main Street with Dan Adamson's coach house to one side, it's a fantastic piece of early railway history. The building on the right may have been the original pub. We know the Grey Horse, most people remember, is on the other side of the road, but that might have been the original one because it's attached to Dan Adamson's coach house. And Dan Adamson was one of these amazing entrepreneurs who ran a pub, but soon realised the railway was an extra source of income and started running coaches to join onto it so people could join onto the line and travel down to Darlington and Teesside. And we've got the first examples of people actually commuting on a railway. And all the modern problems of overcrowded railways. The first day of the SNDR is the first overcrowded train. So we've got some of the earliest good and bad experiences of railways that you might start off with. So Dan Adamson's coach house there, standing unused at the moment. Who can think of a better use for it? But that's what it might have looked like. The coaches would have been stage coaches almost. And in the early days, they would have had special wheels on them so they could have fitted onto the line and competed to some degrees with the steam locomotives hauling the coal. But wandering around the town, there's so many other reminders. Timothy Hackworth's grave, the lines of some of the early branch lines going through the town, which are marked out, the Surtees line, the Black Boy line. So by the time John Dixon, who we heard from earlier on, had actually drawn his surveys of the town in the 1830s, again, the middle of this, that's the Mason's Arms crossings there, Timothy Hackworth House down here. But the wagon works, which began to grow and grow, is already growing by 1839. The settlements are growing, rows of terraced houses are being built. By the 1860s, the two settlements are growing significantly. The coal is bringing more and more people in. The places are growing. It's becoming a real railway hub. In the 1840s, the inclines, the Brusselton and Netherley inclines, become redundant because they build the Shildon tunnel. And the tunnel itself is fantastic. It's the oldest in-use railway tunnel in the country. And when they opened it, they actually celebrated with the letting off of cannons, suggesting that they were very, very confident in their own engineering. They weren't going to bring the roof down. They liked big parties when they opened things, something hopefully we can emulate in 2025. But when they opened it, they actually walked through it with candles and bands till they got to the other side. And then every public house in Shildon was open for the night to celebrate the opening of the new tunnel. They really knew how to celebrate their railway heritage in those days. And just to sort of come to a conclusion, just think about a few people. The people you can see here, person on the right with the sitting down with the large beard and the fob watch in his waistcoat. This is Dan Adamson Jr. So Daniel Adamson, who opened the coach house in Shildon. This is his son, who was apprenticed to Timothy Hackworth at the age of 13, became a fantastic engineer in his own right, eventually became the manager of the Heat and Iron Works down near Manchester, and was one of the main promoters of the Manchester Ship Canal, and ran a factory employing 600 engineers. So people trained in Shildon took their skills to the rest of the world. Timothy Hackworth in the middle there, hopefully most of you know about him, from Wylam in Northumberland, founded his engineering works here, chief superintendent at the S&DR, lots of really important railway inventions which went on to help boost the Industrial Revolution. And then the chap I'd like to finish with, because I just think it's such an incredible story, is the chap on the left here, another fantastic beard. This is Timothy's son, John Wesley Hackworth, who should be an inspiration for the school children of Shildon. He never really studied that hard, but he really liked his engineering. He was always in the workshops, learning how to do things. And in the early 1830s, Hackworth was given a commission to build the first railway engine to go to Russia. The Tsar of Russia laid out a fairly small railway of only about 8 or 9 miles between some of his royal palaces. And it was really to sort of just take the posh people backwards and forwards, but he was hoping it might lead to a Russian industrial revolution. Hackworth was unavailable to actually take the engine. Hackworth's brother was unavailable to take the engine. So they gave the job to 16-year-old John Wesley Hackworth, who went with a crowd of workmen from the Hackworth Works at Shildon. They took a ship, because of course there were no railways to transport anything on, so a ship to Germany. And then they hauled the parts of the railway engine across the Baltic states during the middle of winter. They were pursued by wolves on several occasions. Things froze and broke. Eventually they got the engine there. They put it together. One of the cylinders cracked, at which point one of the workmen had to take it 600 miles to Moscow because it was the only place that could actually cast a new one. and then returned back to St. Petersburg, where they put the engine together, and the Tsar was very pleased indeed. But just fancy giving a 16-year-old boy that job today. You know, it's just absolutely amazing. The main thing his parents were amazed by, when he finally came back a year or so later, with his own passport signed by the Tsar, he'd grown a beard in the Russian style, which he obviously kept until the end of his days, which is a bit shocking, I think, to kids. But the place, Shildon, but Shildon helped build the railways. And we'll just finish with a nice little picture of the Brussels to Link line, which people in the Shildon area today are doing a fantastic job of looking out for. So thank you to all those who do the work on that. Back over to you, Sam.
Fantastic. We've got a few more minutes. I wonder, Niall, if you want to say something about the plans for 2025 in a couple of sentences. I know you could talk about that for a whole hour itself, but some of the plans and the kind of role of the Friends of the Stockton and Darlington Railway in looking towards the 2025 celebrations.
Yeah, 2025, what we're working for, 2025 will be a big party, but we don't want it to be a party amongst ruins. 1975 was a great party, but very shortly afterwards, a lot of things were just left to go to rack and ruin. So what we're hoping to do, we're working with the three local councils, Darlington, Durham and Stockton, as well as National Rail Museum, a whole lot of other people, so that there will be big events in 2025, but we want a walking cycling route along the full 26 miles. We want restored buildings, we want interpretation in place. But more importantly, we want the people in all the communities along the line to actually take care of their own bits and look after them and be responsible for them. So we've got all sorts of projects to work with school children. The events of 2025 are still a little bit up in the air, to say the least. There won't, I don't think, be a big cavalcade like there was in 75. because that was only 8 or 9 years after the end of live steam on British Rail. So there was all the facilities still in place to run steam engines, and it's that we're in a health and safety conscious world now, so it will be different. But we're still very hopeful. There'll be all sorts of really worthwhile events going on. To some degree, it's there to be shaped. If people have got ideas, we would very much like to know about them, because if we can, we'll make sure they're fed into all the plots and plans that are being made, and it'll all be the better for it if they're ideas which come from people in Shildon, from Witton Park, or wherever. Improve the thing no end.
Well, fantastic. We look forward to seeing how that all unfolds and develops. We've probably got time for a quick question. If anyone has a question for Niall about what we've learnt so far, it's a real kind of snapshot of a lot of history in 20 minutes. But if anyone wants to mention or raise a question, and you can always put the questions in the chat as well, and we can pick up the questions. Or a comment.
I mean, one thing I will mention that when we were doing lots of survey work on the railway a few years back to see what's left of it, clearly you need to know what's there before you can look after it. We were wandering around Shildon, and the gentleman, I'll never know his name, but he overheard what we were talking about. And as many of you might know, Timothy Hackworth, as well as George Stephenson, both put engines into the Rainhill trials in 1829, which was the Liverpool Railway, and the cylinders had been made in Stephenson's factory. Stephenson sabotaged Hackworth's engine. There's no truth in this at all, as far as we can figure out. But this chap, who happened to overhear what we were talking about as we walked around Shildon, immediately leapt to the defence of Timothy Hackworth and accused George Stephenson of industrial espionage. So it's nice to know that even after 200 years, these stories still run thick, and people still get rather annoyed about them at times.
Cool. Well, thank you very much for that fantastic kind of summary of Shildon and Shildon's place in the story. We're going to skip forward 155 or something years now, 160 years to the 1980s, and I'm going to hand over to Dave from Stute from Shildon Railway Institute, who's going to pick up from here. So over to you, Dave. If Dave is with us.
Yes, I am.
Oh, so sorry.
Yeah, I just forgot to come off mute, that's all. So yes, I'm going to sort of bring things a little bit more up to date. Just by means of introduction, I'm Dave Reynolds. I am by day, I work for BT, and in my spare time, among other things, I've got a curious fascination with history. So I'm part of a group that's connected to Shildon Railway Institute, and we've made it our job to help the committee there and try to make sure that we look after that going forward and make sure that it's still there for generations to come. I recognise one or two faces on this call involved with that, so there's quite a good team behind that. I'm also the director of a not-for-profit company that was set up to champion parts of Shildon's history and heritage that have perhaps fallen through the cracks. So that's how come I come to be involved in this. We've heard a little bit from Niall there about some of the luminaries, the great names that are involved with the Stockton and Darlington Railway and Shildon's backstory. But I just wanted to talk about something else really, which is that much of what was achieved here was built on the backs of the efforts of some quite ordinary and yet in many ways extraordinary people. And those people themselves have stories to tell. What I'd like to do to start with is read an extract from this. Now, I'll show you this. I collect things like this. This is a book of sorts that was written by a gentleman called Ron Spedding. Some of you might remember Ron. It's called Shildon Wagon Works, A Working Man's Life. And within here, it documents his experiences as a worker at the railway works in Shildon between the years of 1940 and when the works closed. And I found this particular story, it's just a couple of paragraphs from what Ron wrote. I found this quite touching, and you get from what I'm about to read a real sense of the kind of community that Shildon once was because of the presence of the works. So I'll just read this to you. See how you feel about this. I remember my first day at the shops as if it was yesterday, arising from a warm bed at 6:30 a.m. to face a dark and cold January morning. I had no appetite. I was too excited at the realisation that I was no longer a schoolboy, but a young man going out to work to earn my keep and become independent by joining the ranks of the proud railwaymen. I dressed quickly, feeling rather awkward and uncomfortable in a pair of new boots and overalls. The overalls felt stiff and cumbersome, and the boots, like all new boots, definitely needed breaking in. But who cared? So small a setback was trivial to an overexcited 14-year-old. I also stepped into my first pair of long trousers, bought in haste by my mother the previous day. In those days, it was the custom for boys to wear short trousers until they were old enough to go to work. The minutes ticked by, and eventually the time arrived for me to set off. I picked up my new bait box, placed it under my arm, kissed my mother goodbye, and then stepped through the doorway to embrace my destiny. It was bitterly cold outside. The lowly streets lay under a white blanket of sparkling frost, illuminated by a full moon and a clear sky full of twinkling stars. It seemed strange to me to see the moon and stars in the morning, but it was an experience I was to witness for the next 42 winters. The streets were so very quiet that the steady tread of my hobnailed boots, muffled by the ground frost, sounded unnatural. As I proceeded, men appeared out of the shadows to move in the same direction as myself. A door would open to reveal a shaft of light and a figure silhouetted for a moment, and then the door would close and the figure would move forward to join the general flow. As I approached the works, the number of figures increased rapidly until I was surrounded by a mass of moving humanity. The streets now reverberated to the sound of nearly 2,000 men. 4,000 hobnailed boots were beating out a rhythm in the cold morning air. To my mind at that time, it looked and sounded like an army on the move, which indeed it was. An army of working men, all in similar dress, bound for the same destination. As we entered the works gates, the steam buzzer blew with insistent clarity, giving all present a loud reminder that another working day had just begun. And I think it was that was from 1940, as I say, Ron's first day at work. And I think what really got me about that was that so many people who lived here had that common purpose and that camaraderie of walking to work together and walking home together. And it wasn't just in 1940. What I'd like to do next for you is play you an extract from a film that we made. So this company, not-for-profit company that I became a part of with a group of the people, we one of the things we wanted to do was preserve some of that oral history. And in 2019, it marked the 35th anniversary of the closure of Shildon Works. And the people at the Railway Institute had an idea that we should really mark that and invite former workers from the works to come along and spend a little bit of time together and chat and recall their days at the works. And in preparation for that, we made this film where we interviewed a number of former apprentices and workers from the works, just talking about their story. One of them is in this meeting tonight, so you know who you are, Colin. So thank you, and I hope you don't mind me showing this clip. I've cheated a little bit. There's a little bit at the start which shows a few images of the works, just to give you an impression, if you aren't familiar with it, of what kind of working environment it was. There's a stunning little bit of aerial photography showing you what the work site looks like now. And there's a moment where it just blends from the past. You get to see what it looked like in the 1970s, 80s. And again, see just how little in some ways it's changed, and yet how much it's changed in other ways. And then you'll hear this, the stories of the people telling you about their time. Right, I'm going to do a little bit of screen sharing then. And hopefully this will work. I know Zoom can be a little bit strange with this, but let's see how it works. So this is an extract from our film, The Full Works.
Heartwarming memory for me, because I lived right at the top end of the town. So it set off just me from the bungalows, and then you'd be working your way through the estate, and at every junction people would be joining on. And the closer it got to the works, it was just a sea of blue overalls walking down, and you felt like you were part of something. It didn't feel, later in life, you're driving to work in your car on your own, thinking it was uplifting to see that. Maybe if you've spent 20 years in the repair shop, you didn't have that. But as a kid, it was a real big thing to me.
I can remember getting off the Eden bus half past 6, 7:15, and people walking down Barley Road. There was literally hundreds of people up and getting ready for work. And it did feel like the word community is banded about a lot, but it was a community. And it wasn't just working for the railways, it was all the people, little like corner shops and everything.
When work dropped off, you got sent where the labouring. I was working in the paint shop at one time.
But what did you do? I went out and wandered. I went up the lift and brake, up past the wheel shop, up the stores. I had a look around. I mean, you couldn't hang around too long, otherwise somebody would have been kicking your backside for stopping people from working. But I remember being up the lift and brake, and Mr. Hartfield, absolutely cracking gaffer he was. It's a case of, he gave me my first sort of spanners. It's like, as if, whoa, you trusted with proper gear, you know what I mean? And then you think yourself, you have to come down for your bait, down the shop. And it was miles. You know what I mean? You're setting away and you're thinking, by the time I get down there, I'm not going to have half my bait and I'll have to get myself back up, like.
To see as many people, and I can just remember the noise. Because I mean, if you went in the forge, it was so loud. And a lot of people from Shildon who I work with in my present job, like that, some of the girls can remember the parents going to work at the shops. But you can always remember the noise of the foundry.
Oh, I mean, the forge. Yeah. I mean, I lived up in Alexander Street, and when I either rode my bike or walked down through the park, and as soon as you got to the top of the wreck, boom, boom, you could hear the forge rattling away, like, unbelievable. Yeah. I mean, the whole way, until, like I say, it was all cracking on noise and everything, and then obviously bait time, you could hear the pipes bouncing away and stuff like that, and then after that, it was a case of noise, 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 and then when you finish your shift, so it's not as if you could hide anything because you finished it early, because obviously the gaffer would have known, how come there's anybody producing out there, there's no noise. But of course, say he walks out, sees everything done, he's happy.
I loved it, because being from New Shildon, I played around the site of the works, you know, knocking about as kids, going up the fields and what have you. But again, it was that sense of awe that, you know, walking the lines between shops and these huge wagons, and wherever you went, people, you know, old and young, sport, yeah, you know, all right, young, and it was, you know, as been mentioned by many people, there was a real sense of camaraderie. Well, some people kept themselves to themselves, didn't like to be bothered with by young kids, but most people were very engaging and glad to have you on board, kind of thing.
So that's the extract from the full works, and the full film's available if anybody wants to watch it. It's available just on YouTube. It's over an hour long, and tells the story mainly of the apprentices from the beginning to the point where the works closes, just from their perspective. So please do. It's, as I say, it's on YouTube. If you search for the full works or Shildon Telly, you'll find it. Do I have time, Sam, to talk about a little about what we're doing this year for people to look forward to?
Go for it.
Thanks. I'll keep it really brief, but yeah. So as I said, part of our mission is to try and research and look after the heritage that falls between the cracks a little bit. And one of the things is at the Railway Institute there's a war memorial, and unlike most war memorials, it doesn't just list the people who didn't come back, but listed an awful lot of people who went and did come back. And what we've been doing, there's a group of about 8 of us, is for November this year. In November, it'll be 100 years since that memorial was installed. So we're researching the lives of all the people on there, the ones that went and lost their lives tragically in a fairly terrible circumstances, and the ones who came back and had to live with the consequences of having left Shildon for some time, and spending that time in battle and at the front. And it's not just men. There are nurses in there as well, ladies who went and spent time as nurses during that war. And hopefully we'll have something to share from that people will be able to refer to if they were related to any of those people. Just give a little bit more of a perspective on what happened to those people. So that's something to look forward to in November. We will be announcing details of how we'll be sharing that. Sorry, I seem to lose my thread there a little bit, Sam.
No, it's fantastic. Thank you for sharing. And do, if there's any more details, feel free to put it in the chat, or we can email everybody on this call today with details as well. So I think it's probably time for a bit of music. What do you reckon, Dave?
Why not?
Do you want to talk about what happened yesterday? What happened in the rain?
Yeah, Sam and I had a bit of a meet-up yesterday evening, and this is around a song that I wrote possibly, again, about 2 years ago, having done quite a lot of research, and I think as well, off the back of making that film and hearing what was said in that film too. And it's something of a folk song, and Sam's a really good musician and singer, and suggested that perhaps we could collaborate on this so that we had something to share with you. So what I've tried to do in the song is I've tried to distill the story of Shildon and its railway works and people into just a few minutes. It's one of those Reader's Digest condensed books. There's a few references in there that you might recognise. And yeah, we got together, we got our instruments out, set up a camera, and then it started to rain. So we had one run through, and then we set the cameras rolling, and this is what happened, I guess. So I hope you enjoy it.
Cool. Shall I share mine? Yeah, I've got it. Yeah, great. 1, 2, 3, 4.
We came from the fields and the hills and farms, lured by the fire of the forge, and we raised our homes by the rails of iron in the shadow of the old Royal George. The lean and the worry became engineers, sawyers and blacksmiths too, bathing in sparks and the rust and steam till the water came trickling through. We are the heart, we are still ingenuity as well, and the wagons carried the diamond black from the ground into the mouth of hell. So we'll raise a glass to the temperance band and the ghost of Hackwood Sands. When the last wagon rolls out of Shildon town, will you tell me that my work is done? We were the boys on the box job, mechanics all, welders and riveters too. From the machine shop to the lift and brake, every man knew what they had to do. By the blacksmith shop, hear the striker ring, forging a marching tune, to be drawn on paper by a lantern light for the band on Sunday afternoon. They had the heart, they had the skill, breaking sweat from every pore, and the wagons carried the wool and cloth from the mill out to the clothing store. So we'll raise a glass to the temperance band and the ghost of Hackwood Sands. When the last wagon rolls out of Shildon town, will you tell me that my work is done? From 14 to 18 we fueled the war, making caps for the shells at the yard. We brought in women to hear in the score till the stars. Over 10,000 times we made the merry-go-round. You could feel the pride as the men sent them forth to the world from the mason's arms, until broken they came back again. 82 saw the word come from number 10, bound up in ribbons of blue. They wanted the iron to build Thatcher's name, and they take all the other stuff too. So we'll raise a glass to the future we lost. We are the ghosts of backward songs. When the last wagon rolls out of Shildon town, and they told me that my work is done. So we'll raise a glass to the temperance band and the ghosts of backward songs. When the last wagon rolls out of Shildon town, and they tell me that my work is done. That my work is done. Tell me that my work is done.
There we go. So thank you, Dave, for a fantastic song that you brought to the project. And we look forward to the day we can play that in person in front of an audience for real. But we carry on for now. So the evening is nearly up, but we have one more little treat for us, which is a song and a project really that is kind of present day, and looks towards the future, looks towards what Shildon means today for people living there. And I'm going to hand over to Katie Milne, who's going to do a much better job than I am of introducing the project. So Katie, it's over to you.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Katie from Greenfield Arts, which is an arts organisation that works across Shildon and Newton Aycliffe, and we have an arts centre facility in Newton Aycliffe, where we like to encourage curiosity, creativity and inquiry. And it's an absolute treat to be here tonight and to see so many faces on the screen. Thank you for such a lovely evening and for organising that for everybody. We were delighted to commission citizen songwriters and some marvellous community members of the group that worked together there to help us to respond to our project called Shildon Emotion, and to respond to the community contributions that we'd had over the past few years, looking at Shildon's significant, rich heritage, past, present and future. And this short film that Sam's going to play for you celebrates that 2-year-long project, and the culmination, which is the artwork at Shildon Station that will be finished at the end of next month, and is a celebration of all of that rich heritage, as Sam said, up to the present day and looking into the future. It's full of amazing people, amazing heritage and a fantastic community spirit. So I hope you enjoy the film and the rest of the evening.
Shildon Show was a great community event. Everybody's relatives came to visit and enjoy the fun.
We used to have a field day along West Row. All the children were given a goodie bag with an apple, an orange and some sweets.
Shildon's mining history dates back to the mid-18th century. There were 23 pits and drift mines around the town. Shildon is the place where the world's first steam-powered public railway sprang to life. There is lots of history wherever you look.
Shildon is a town with a village-style community where people pull together. People support one another when it matters.
The Jubilee Fields Community Centre is an important place with a real sense of community and lots of support for isolated people.
They have a wonderful community spirit that you don't get in most towns.
There's so much to celebrate in our community. The Jubilee Fields Community Centre brings everyone together, and the park is a special place.
It's Shildon where we're heading. It's cold dust that we're shedding. We're off to somewhere new. Weird Al, we're leaving you. Behind us birds are flying. Our little train is climbing. To the heart, Shildon, we're coming. Laughing, dancing, meeting. Everybody's celebrating. All the sounds of life beginning. As our train comes rolling in. Come down, come down. Come down to the railway town. There's always a smile around that you can rely on. Come down, come down, come down to Shildon town, where the gift of the world was found as we ride down the railway line. Now those pioneers from Darlow brought the wagons and the cargo with a flash of inspiration, built a brand new steam creation. And though the works are now gone, its legacy still lives on. Climb on board now for our next ride, over the bridge on the riverside, filling its people with joy and with pride, down to the ocean that's open and wide as our train comes rolling in. Come down, come down, come down to the railway town. There's always a smile around that you can rely on. Come down, come down, come down to Shildon town, where the gift of the world was found as we ride. From the coal face to the teas, always still dream of endless possibilities. Though life moves on, not the spirit nor the song, but the railway carries on. Come down, come down, come down to the railway town. There's always a smile around that you can rely on. Come down, come down, come down to Shildon town, where the gift to the world was found as we ride. Come down, come down, come down to the railway town. There's always a smile around that you can rely on. Come down, come down, come down to Shildon town, where the gift of the world is found in the cradle of the railway line.
There we go. So thank you very much, Katie and Shildon Immersion Project, for the wonderful work you're doing. And I think it's a wonderful way to sort of finish tonight, showcasing some of the wonderful projects and stories that already we have in Shildon, and the work that the citizen songwriters and the Friends of Stockton and Darlington Railway and Shildon Railway Institute, the Stute, are going to carry on over the next kind of 3 or 4 months, and we'll building on this incredible legacy already. There are 2 workshops that I want to mention really quickly, just before we finish. And in June we have 2 really exciting workshops coming up in person, and they are the 1st of June and the 11th of June. And they all involve walking around Shildon, sharing stories, meeting each other, and then tea and cake at Shildon Railway Institute on the Tuesday, and then lunch together on the Friday. And this is an open invitation to you all. We will have to cap the numbers, I think, at 25, with the people kind of organising it as well, to make sure we're within 30. So, but I wanted to give you kind of an opportunity to note those dates if you're interested in taking part. And the idea is that we'll continue sharing stories, and the second workshop particularly will move towards the music. And the way that we run the workshops with citizen songwriters is that anyone can take part. You know, if you count yourself musical or not, you might think you can't sing, but I can me and Alex, who's also on the call, will kind of show you that actually singing and taking part. Alex is giving us a wave. Alex was actually involved in the song you heard just now, and we run the workshops in a kind of very friendly way. Anyone can take part. So if you're interested and you think you'd like to come along and take part in some of the storytelling and songwriting workshops, do get involved. We're going to email out the details of how you register, So that will be sent to you on an email. So thank you very much for coming and giving up your evening to take part in tonight. Please do, if you want to carry on using the chat for any kind of links or any comments that you might want to make before we finally close. And just a huge thank you to Niall from the Friends of Stockton Darlington Railway, to Dave from the Shildon Railway Institute, and others on the call today who are also part of those organisations, and Katie from Greenfield Arts as well for coming along. And I hope you've had a lovely evening and look forward to seeing you, meeting you one day in person.